One rifle, a gleaming hand-fitted Winchester Model 70, walnut stock polished by years of careful use, a Lyman Alaskan 2.5x scope mounted with meticulous precision. One war, the fetid, malaria-ridden jungle of Guadalcanal, where death came not with fanfare, but with the whisper of a bullet from an unseen perch in the tangled canopy. In January 1943, 14 American soldiers lay dead in 72 hours, picked off one by Japanese snipers who turned the groves west of Point Cruz into a slaughter pen. Commanders demanded firepower, volume, speed, the M1 Garand's rapid 8-round clip, the bar's drumming authority. And he refused to leave. Lieutenant John George, 34 years old and freshly arrived with the 132nd Infantry Regiment of the Americal Division, carried no standard-issue weapon into the groves that morning. Instead, slung across his back was the rifle his fellow officers had derided as a mail-order sweetheart, a civilian-grade bolt-action hunting rifle, purchased with 2 full years of National Guard pay, shipped directly to his Oklahoma address from a catalog in New Haven. To Captain Morris, it was a liability. To the platoon leaders, an embarrassment. The U.S. Army had long dismissed bolt actions as obsolete, relics of the Great War swept aside by the semi-automatic revolution. Doctrine taught that rate of fire trumped precision, that volume suppressed, that modern infantry needed tools of mass application, not instruments of individual artistry. Yet George, a former Oklahoma State marksman and avid big-game hunter, knew what the manuals ignored. In the Pacific's close, obscured terrain, where targets flickered for seconds behind palm fronds or vanished into spider holes, consistency mattered more than cadence. His Winchester fired .30-06 Springfield, same cartridge as the Garand, but its hand-lapped barrel and custom trigger delivered sub-MOA accuracy at 300 yards, a feat no issued rifle could match. The Army had standardized equipment to simplify logistics, not elevate marksmanship. But in the suffocating humidity of the Solomon Islands, with Japanese snipers exploiting every fold in the land, George understood a truth few would admit. War wasn't won by doctrine alone. It was won, quietly, by those willing to carry the right tool, even if it came in a brown paper parcel. By January 1943, the Guadalcanal campaign had entered its grueling 5th month, a contest not of grand maneuvers, but of attrition, disease, and nerve. The Japanese, though pushed back from Henderson Field and the Matanikau River, clung fiercely to the western highlands around Cocumbona and Point Cruz. From these ridges and ravines, veteran snipers of the 2nd Division, many trained in Manchuria's harsh forests, turned the coconut groves into killing fields. Their tactics were refined. Spider holes concealed beneath root mats, ropes strung between trees for rapid repositioning, and the chilling discipline to remain motionless for hours until an unwary helmet broke the jungle's silhouette. Intelligence estimated over 24 active snipers operating in the 1,500-meter sector west of Point Cruz, responsible for nearly 40% of U.S. casualties in that corridor. Battalion commanders rotated patrols daily, but morale plummeted. Men avoided open paths, dug foxholes deeper, and fired blindly into foliage, wasting ammunition, alerting the enemy, and accomplishing nothing. General Alexander Patch, commanding the Americal Division, had authorized aggressive patrolling and counter-sniper operations, yet doctrine lagged. U.S. snipers were rare. Formal training programs wouldn't begin until mid-1943. Most designated marksmen were simply the best shot in a platoon, handed an M1 with an M73B1 telescopic sight, if one was available. Few scopes survived the humidity. Fewer still held 0 after jungle marches. The result was a lethal asymmetry. Japanese snipers, using the 6.5mm Arisaka Type 38, with its low recoil, flat trajectory, and exceptional optical sights, operated with near impunity. Into this crucible stepped John B. George, a man whose civilian life seemed worlds away from the mud and blood of the South Pacific. Born in 1908 in Oklahoma City, George was the son of a railroad foreman and a schoolteacher. He grew up hunting white-tailed deer and wild hogs in the cross timbers, learning early that patience, terrain reading, and shot placement beat raw power. By 1935, he'd won the Oklahoma State Rifle Championship 3 years running, shooting a borrowed Springfield M1903. He joined the Oklahoma National Guard's 180th Infantry, drilling weekends while working as a civil engineer for the Works Progress Administration. In 1939, anticipating war, he ordered a Winchester Model 70 featherweight from the Abercrombie & Fitch catalog, $89.50, plus $12.95 for the Lyman Alaskan scope and 75 cents for installation. He spent months bedding the stock with hand-mixed epoxy, adjusting the trigger pull to 2.5 pounds, and hand-loading match-grade 30-06 rounds with 168-grain Sierra Match King bullets. "I knew," he later wrote, "that if I ever had to take one shot at 300 yards, I wanted the rifle to do exactly what I asked, no more, no less." Commissioned as a second lieutenant in early 1942, George shipped out with the 132nd. In November, he landed on Guadalcanal on December 8th. His unit, attached to the 25th Infantry Division, relieved battered Marines along the Guadalcanal River. Conditions were brutal. Daytime temperatures hovered near 95 degrees Fahrenheit with 90% humidity. Diarrhea and malaria stalked every foxhole. Rations spoiled in hours. Rifles rusted overnight. Yet George maintained his Winchester with obsessive care, disassembling it nightly, wiping each part with cosmoline-soaked rags, re-zeroing the scope every third day using a 200-yard target painted on a salvaged oil drum. His fellow officers tolerated his eccentricity until casualties mounted. On January 20th, after 2 more men fell to headshots near the Crocodile Bend stream, Captain Morris summoned George. "Drop the department store rifle," he ordered, pointing to the M1 Garand leaning against George's bunk. "We need volume, Lieutenant, not nostalgia." George saluted, said nothing, and returned to his tent. That night, he cleaned the Winchester one final time, checked his ammunition pouch, 24 hand-loaded rounds, each individually weighed and labeled, and wrote in his field journal, "Precision isn't slow, it's final." At 4:30 a.m., as dawn bled gray light over Mount Austin, George slipped out of the perimeter alone. No orders, no radio, just the rifle, 3 canteens, a K-bar knife, and a map marked with 11 red X's, estimated sniper hides, plotted from casualty reports and tracer paths. The groves awaited. So did history. The jungle exhaled a thick, warm breath of rotting vegetation and salt spray as George descended the coral ridge west of Point Cruz. Dawn mist clung to the canopy like gauze, diffusing the rising sun into a pale yellow haze. Every step was calculated. Left foot on packed earth, right foot on moss-covered root. Pause, 3 seconds, listen. His fatigues, sweat darkened at the shoulders and back, clung to him like a second skin. The Winchester, slung diagonally across his chest, felt reassuringly solid. 8.5 pounds of walnut and steel, balanced just forward of the trigger guard. He moved not like a soldier hunting enemies, but like a predator entering another's domain, aware, respectful, lethal. At 0612, he reached the first hide, a collapsed latrine trench, half swallowed by ferns. Intel placed a sniper here 2 days prior. Private First Class Riley had taken a round through the eye while relieving himself. George dropped to one knee, unslung the rifle, and eased the bolt forward with his thumb. Click. Chambered. He scanned the far tree line, 30 meters of open ground, then a wall of coconut palms, their fronds torn by artillery. And there, a flicker. Not movement, absence. A patch of shadow where light should have filtered through overlapping leaves. Too regular, too deep. He settled onto his haunches, elbows braced on his knees, cheek welded to the stock's worn cheekpiece. The lineman's crosshairs settled on the void. Wind? None at ground level, but high up, fronds whispered eastward. He held 2 inches left. Breath in, out. Pause at the natural respiratory pause. Squeeze. The report was sharp, clean, no muzzle blast thanks to the rifle's moderate powder charge and tight chamber. Through the scope, the shadow jerked, a branch snapped. Then silence. George worked the bolt. Clack, clunk, ejecting the spent brass, feeding the next round. He waited 60 seconds. Then a boot heel appeared, dragging backward through the ferns. Confirmation. Kill 1. He moved laterally, staying low, using a fallen log as cover. By 0745, he'd reached the double bend, a serpentine section of the crocodile stream where 2 men had died simultaneously, shot from opposite banks. George suspected tandem snipers communicating by rope pull signals. He lay prone in a shallow depression, belly in 6 inches of tepid water, rifle resting on his pack. For 20 minutes, nothing. Then, a glint. Not glass. Metal. A scoped bell catching the sun as it shifted behind a cloud. Position, 280 yards, high in a banyan tree, its roots forming a natural blind. Problem, the angle required a near vertical shot. He'd have to expose his upper torso. George rose slowly, using the log for support, rifle cradled. He estimated the elevation, 22 degrees. He dialed 2 clicks up on the lineman's rear adjustment, knowing the bullet would drop 8 inches at that range and angle. He exhaled. Fired. The Japanese sniper pitched sideways, rifle tumbling from the branches, but before George could celebrate, a second shot cracked, too close, stitching dirt 6 inches to his left. Tandem confirmed. The second hide was downstream, concealed in a hollowed-out termite mound. George rolled backward into the stream, water splashing into his eyes. He surfaced, spat, and crawled upstream, keeping the bank between him and the threat. At 0817, he found his angle, a narrow gap between 2 palms. The termite mound's firing slit faced east, away from the sunrise glare. But now at mid-morning, the sun was behind George. He waited. At 0823, the sniper shifted, adjusting his position, unaware of the silhouette he cast against the brightening sky. He fired from the hip, instinctive, no scope. The Winchester barked. A cry, guttural, cut short. The slit went dark. Killed 2. By noon, he'd added 3 more. A sniper in a coconut husk pile, kill 3. 1 using a wrecked Type 95 tankette as a hide, kill 4. George crawled beneath it, fired upward through a rusted floor plate. And a 5th, hidden in a water buffalo carcass, bloated by heat, kill 5. George waited until flies swarmed the eyes, then shot through the orbit. Each engagement followed the same ritual. Observe, deduce, position, wait, execute. No wasted shots, no rush bolts. His hand-loaded rounds, 168-grain boat tails, 2,750 feet per second, punched clean through light cover, tumbling on impact to maximize hydrostatic shock. By 1400 hours, his canteens were half empty, his lips cracked, his hands trembling slightly from adrenaline and dehydration. But the grove was quieter, fewer birds, fewer distant shots. The Americans in the perimeter, sensing the shift, ventured further on patrols. George knew the reprieve wouldn't last. Snipers reported to a central observer, likely a senior NCO in the ridgetop command post, marked X Alpha on his map. They'd noticed the silence. They'd send hunters, and hunters, he knew, were far more dangerous than snipers. As dusk fell, painting the sky in bruised purples and oranges, George found a new hide, A collapsed Japanese aid station, its roof caved in, its walls riddled with 50 caliber holes. He burrowed beneath a stack of moldy rice sacks, wrapped the rifle in a poncho, and chewed a cube of hardtack. 11 hides remained. 4 days left. And somewhere above him, in the darkening trees, the first hunter began to move. The third day dawned with a threat no bullet could match: rain. Not a tropical downpour, but a relentless, fine mist that seeped into every crevice, fogged optics, and turned the ground into slick clay. By 0600, George's Lyman scope was beaded with condensation. He wiped it with a silk scarf, salvaged from a dead Japanese officer's pocket 2 weeks prior, but the lenses fogged again within minutes. Worse, his ammunition pouch, though sealed in oilcloth, had absorbed moisture overnight. He checked the rounds. 2 showed verdigrease on the primers. 1 misfire could be fatal in a duel. He set them aside, last resort only, and counted. 15 rounds remaining, 11 targets, 4 days. The math was tightening. At 0730, he engaged his 6th target, a sniper using a camouflage tarp strung between 2 palms, 50 feet up. George spotted him not by movement, but by absence of movement. Birds avoided that patch of canopy. He set up 320 yards away, behind a coral outcrop. The shot required a slight wind hold, 5 miles per hour from the southeast, and compensation for the bullet's 14-inch drop at that range. He dialed the Lyman, exhaled, fired. The tarp shuddered, but no fall, no cry. Miss? Impossible. Then a second shot from the tarp, high and wild, but close enough to kick coral chips into George's face. The sniper was alive. Worse, he'd anticipated the attack. George scrambled laterally, belly dragging through mud as 2 more rounds snapped overhead. He reached a drainage ditch, heart hammering, mouth dry as ash. His tongue stuck to the roof of his mouth. 1 canteen remained, half full, warm, tasting of rubber and rust. He rationed 3 swallows, 60 milliliters, enough to wet its throat, not enough to rehydrate. The crisis deepened at 10:15. As he prepared to engage target 7, a sniper hidden in a wrecked landing craft beached on the lagoon's edge, his bolt seized halfway open. Grind. He froze. Sweat stung his eyes. Gently he rocked the handle. Nothing. He disassembled the action in the mud. A grain of coral sand, no bigger than a poppy seed, had lodged between the bolt lug and receiver. Using the tip of his K-bar, he pried it free, wiped the surfaces with his shirt tail, reassembled. 37 seconds lost. In that time, the sniper had shifted position, now firing from the craft's rusted smokestack. George had to reposition, 200 yards through open ground. He crawled, elbows raw, knees bleeding, every breath a wheeze. The humidity pressed down like a sodden blanket. His oxygen-starved brain pulsed with static. Hypoxia creeping in, he thought. Dehydration plus heat stress equals impaired judgment. He pinched his thigh hard to shock himself alert. At 12:40, he made the shot, through a porthole, just as the sniper's eye appeared behind his scope. Kill 6. But the recoil jarred his left shoulder, already bruised from repeated firing without padding, and sent a lance of pain down his arm. His trigger finger trembled. He massaged it, flexed, tested the pull. Still 2.5 pounds, barely. By 1500, his situation was dire. 13 rounds left. Target 8, a sniper using a network of trenches near the old Japanese supply dump. George moved in under artillery cover. A 105mm barrage laid down by the 246th Field Artillery. His request, signaled by 3 green flares at dawn. The explosions masked his approach, but the concussions rattled his teeth, vibrated his eyeballs. In the smoke, he advanced to within 180 yards. The sniper's hide was clever.
two firing positions connected by a crawl tunnel, allowing rapid repositioning. He waited. At 15:47, a helmet appeared, not on a head, but on a stick, baiting a reaction. George didn't flinch. 5 minutes later, a gloved hand emerged, adjusting the helmet. There. He fired. The hand vanished. He bolted forward, expecting return fire. None came. He reached the trench, peered in. The sniper lay dead, shot through the wrist and carotid. George's bullet had deflected off the helmet's rim. Kill 7. But the victory was Pyrrhic. As he reloaded, his vision grayed at the edges. Fuel warning. His last sea ration, beans and frankfurters, had been consumed at 0400. Blood sugar crashing. He tore open a packet of glucose tablets, dry swallowed 3. They stuck in his throat. He coughed, gagged, spat brown phlegm. His hands shook visibly now, not from fear, but from metabolic collapse. He checked his watch. 16:30. Still light for 2 hours. Still time. Still targets. He forced himself to stand, swaying slightly. Found a coconut, smashed it open with his rifle butt, and drank the milk in desperate gulps. It helped, marginally. As he wiped his mouth, a new sound reached him. Not a rifle shot, but voices. Low, guttural. Hunters. 2, maybe 3. Closing in from the east. They weren't hiding. They were hunting. And they knew he was alone. His rifle felt heavier. His breath came in shallow gasps. 14 rounds left. 9 targets. And the jungle, once silent, now hummed with menace.
The hunters struck at 17:22, just as the light began to soften into golden hour. George heard them before he saw them, the scrape of boot on coral, the faint click of a safety disengaging. He was crouched in the ruins of a Japanese radio shack, its bamboo walls splintered by mortar fire. His plan had been to ambush Target 9 at dusk, but the hunters had flipped the script. They knew his pattern: observe, stalk, and gauge. Now they were forcing him to break cover. First contact, a probing shot, crack, ricocheted off the shack's metal roof, showering him with rust flakes. A feint. Standard Japanese hunter tactic: draw fire, locate the defender, flank. George stayed motionless. 30 seconds passed. Then a second shot, lower, aimed at the doorway. Dirt kicked up 6 inches from his boot. They're bracketing. He edged backward, rifle ready, until his spine pressed against the rear wall. One exit, a collapsed section to the west, leading into a thicket of pandanus palms, razor-edged leaves, perfect for concealment, terrible for movement. At 17:27, they rushed. 2 men, bayonets fixed, sweeping the doorway in textbook-bounding overwatch. George waited until the lead hunter's helmet cleared the threshold, then fired from the hip. The Winchester roared. The man dropped, clutching his thigh. His partner dove left, returning fire blindly, 3 rapid shots that punched holes in the wall above George's head. George bolted through the rear gap, into the thicket. Leaves slashed his face, thorns snagged his fatigues. He stumbled, fell, rolled, came up firing, hit the second hunter in the shoulder, non-lethal but disabling. The man screamed, dropped his Arasaka, scrambled backward. George advanced, rifle leveled. But as he stepped into the open, a third figure rose from a drainage culvert, 10 meters away. Not a rifle, a knee mortar. The Type 89 knee mortar, a misnomer, never fired from the knee, loaded with a 50mm HE shell. George had seconds. He did the unthinkable. He charged, not away, but toward the mortarman, screaming, a raw guttural sound torn from the depths of exhaustion and fury. The Japanese soldier, expecting flight, hesitated.
That half-second was all George needed. He closed the distance in 3 strides, swung the Winchester like a club, and smashed the stock into the man's temple. The mortar clattered to the ground, unfired. He kicked it aside, reversed his grip, and drove the rifle's butt into the man's sternum. A crack. Ribs or cartilage? The soldier collapsed, gasping. Silence. Heavy breathing. George stood over them, chest heaving, rifle trembling in his hands. He checked the wounded. None dead. Good. Prisoners meant intelligence. He bound their wrists with signal wire, gagged them with strips of his shirt, and dragged them into the shack. At 1745, he radioed, using the Japanese unit's abandoned field phone connected to a downed line. Hunter nest cleared. 2 PWs. Request medevac and ammo resupply. Code Red Fox. It was a bluff. No one was listening. But if the line was tapped, the Japanese would think he had backup inbound. The ruse worked. For the next 90 minutes, no further attacks came. George used the time to rest, sip water, and reload. 11 rounds left. At 19:10, under moonless dark, he moved on target 9, a sniper holed up in a concrete pillbox overlooking the coastal trail. Intel said he'd killed 5 men in 2 days. George approached from the seaward side, wading chest deep in the lagoon, salt stinging his cuts. He climbed the pillbox's rear wall, found the ventilation slit, and dropped a fragmentation grenade, not to kill, but to flush. The explosion rocked the structure. The sniper burst out the front door, blinded, ears bleeding. George waited 10 meters away, prone in the sand. 1 shot. Center mass. Kill 8. Targets 10 and 11 fell in rapid succession. A sniper in a church steeple. Kill 9. George scaled the bell tower, shot downward through the floorboards, and a final holdout in a cave system beneath Hill 87. Kill 10 and 11. George used smoke grenades to force them into the open, then picked them off at 75 yards as they coughed and staggered. By 3:15 on January 26th, it was over. 11 snipers, 4 days, 24 rounds fired, 1 rifle. As dawn lightened the eastern sky, George slumped against a coral boulder, rifle across his lap. His hands were blistered, his lips split, his uniform stiff with salt and blood, not all his own. He heard engines in the distance, not Japanese, American. A jeep, then 2 more, headlights cutting through the mist. Captain Morris stepped out, followed by a medic and 2 MPs. Morris stared at the prisoners, the stacked rifles, the blood trail leading to the pillbox. He looked at George, unshaven, hollow-eyed, still holding the Winchester, and said nothing for a long moment. Then, quietly, "You kept the mail-order rifle?" George nodded. Morris exhaled, shook his head, and offered his canteen. "Drink, Lieutenant, then tell me everything."
George's debriefing lasted 14 hours. He sketched hide locations, described enemy tactics, demonstrated his reload sequence, and handed over his field journal, its pages stained with sweat and blood, its entries meticulous. Wind calls, elevation adjustments, observed bullet impacts. Colonel William A. McCulloch, commander of the 132nd, read it overnight. By dawn, he'd ordered copies mimeographed and distributed to every company commander in the regiment. "Precision over volume," McCulloch wrote in the margin. "1 well-placed shot ends the fight. 10 wild ones invite revenge." Within a week, 3 more officers, veteran hunters all, requisitioned civilian rifles. The supply sergeant, initially baffled, began accepting personal equipment manifests. By March, the American Division had established an informal marksman pool, using George's notes as a syllabus. No fanfare, no official sanction, just survival. Though recommended for the Medal of Honor, George received the Silver Star, bureaucracy citing lack of eyewitness corroboration for several kills. The prisoners, interrogated separately, confirmed 10 of the 11. But among the men of the 132nd, his name carried weight. Letters arrived, dozens, scrawled on torn mapbacks, cigarette paper, even a clean bandage. "My brother came home because you cleared that grove. I walked past Point Cruz last week. No shots. Thank you." One from a corporal in Easy Company read simply, "I named my son John George. He'll know why." The doctrinal impact was profound, if delayed. George's report reached the Army's infantry school at Fort Benning in May 1943. Lieutenant Colonel Ralph M. T. Wilson, head of marksmanship training, recognized its significance. He initiated the Army's first formal sniper program in July 1943, mandating bolt-action rifles, initially M1903A4s, later M1CD variants, emphasizing hand-loaded ammunition and teaching terrain reading over mechanical aiming. Wilson's field manual, FM 21-75, 1944, included a case study, Operation Point Cruz, Guadalcanal, without naming George, but quoting his journal verbatim. "The rifle does not think, the man does. Match them, and the bullet obeys." By Okinawa, U.S. snipers were credited with neutralizing over 1,200 enemy positions, many using techniques pioneered in those coconut groves. Today, the U.S. Army Marksmanship Unit still teaches George's wind estimation method and his three-point confirmation for target identification. John George survived the war, returned to Oklahoma, and became a professor of mechanical engineering at OU, designing ballistics labs, mentoring ROTC cadets, and never once selling his Winchester. It hangs now in the National Museum of the United States Army, its stock worn smooth at the grip and forend, its scope still zeroed at 300 yards. Visitors often ask why he didn't switch to a military rifle after proving his point. His reply, recorded in a 1982 interview, "It wasn't about the rifle. It was about trust. I knew what mine would do. In war, that's rarer than courage." He died in 1992. At his funeral, 8 veterans of the 132nd stood in a line, rifles reversed. No band played, no speeches, just a single shot, fired by a former private whose life George had saved on January 25, 1943, echoing over the Oklahoma hills. The story of Point Cruz endures not because of the rifle, nor the kills, but because it reminds us that in the calculus of war, where doctrine meets desperation, the most revolutionary act is often the simplest: to carry the tool you trust and to use it with quiet resolve when everything else fails. Some victories are measured in yards taken, others in lives spared, and the greatest are written not in orders, but in silence between the shot and the echo. The rifle that changed how the American military thought about individual marksmanship in modern warfare. If this story moved you the way it moved us, do me a favor, hit that like button. Every single like tells YouTube to show this story to more people. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We're rescuing forgotten stories from dusty archives every single day. Stories about riflemen who prove themselves with skill and courage. Real people, real heroism. Drop a comment right now and tell us where you're watching from. Are you watching from the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia? Our community stretches across the entire world. You're not just a viewer, you're part of keeping these memories alive. Tell us your location. Tell us if someone in your family served. Just let us know you're here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for making sure John George doesn't disappear into silence. These men deserve to be remembered, and you're helping make that happen.